Next, we are going to look at the textural class. Remember, we said the texture of the soil is the relative composition of the sand, clay, and silt in a soil. And therefore, depending on the relative composition of these three, we are going to find the soil we have certain characteristics, and therefore, it will be treated in a certain way. If the test results gives your soil textural class as loam or loamy, then it will mean that your soil is good for crop production. And therefore, you may not need to do a lot of soil conditioning. But the soil conditioning will be done as per the recommendation. But loam soil is the best soil because it has good composition of the sand, silt, and clay. You may find sometimes it may be different, whereby you may find that your soil is given a textural class as sandy. Sometimes you may find it is sandy loam, sometimes you may find it is clay loam, and therefore I'm going to explain a little bit about this. But if you find your textural class is given as sandy, either it is sandy loam or it is generally sandy, you are going to note that for sand, you find this kind of textural class usually have high drainage because the particle size are a bit bigger. And therefore, aeration is also high, and you find this kind of soil usually have low organic matter, and therefore fertility is also low. You are supposed to do a lot of manuring to be able to improve the condition of this soil so that it can be able to retain water, it can be able to have organic matter, and fertility, generally fertility can be able to improve, and also the water retention can be there so that you are able to improve the condition of that soil. And remember, due to leaching, if your soil is given in the sandy textural class, then it will mean when you are applying fertilizer, you should apply in splits. Because if you apply once, you're going to find that most of the fertilizer of the nitrogen will be depleted, and therefore it will not be available to the plant. And therefore, do in splits such that you can apply at planting, you apply a nitrogenous fertilizer, you can apply together with the phosphatic fertilizer, depending on the recommendation that you are being given by an expert. And therefore, the splits I'm talking about, you do one at planting, and then you can do one 3 weeks later, and then another 3 weeks later, you can do the final split of the nitrogen. So that during this time, the plant is able to get as much nitrogen as it requires. If your textural class of your soil is given as clay, or given as clay loam, you're going to find that clay usually has a high content or a high content of organic matter, and you're going to find that also clay soil doesn't have drainage. Drainage is poor, and also you are going to find there will be waterlogging. And therefore, when you are given your soil as textural class as clay, you need to do some soil conditioning so that your soil can be good for crop production. One thing you can do, you can be able to use some little bit of organic matter. That is, you can use farmyard manure or organic fertilizers so that you can improve the drainage of that soil. And if you can be able to have sand, you can also incorporate sand in your soil so that you can be able to improve the drainage of that soil. And in so doing, you are going to improve the condition of that soil to be able to support crop in a good in a way that is expected. The next parameter that is usually given in the lab result is the bulk density. And remember, we said the bulk density is the compaction of the soil, of your soil. The measure of bulk density is usually given in gram per cubic centimeters. If the bulk density for your soil is given as 1.3 gram per cubic centimeters or more, then it means your soil has high compaction. And if your soil has high compaction, then it will mean your soil will have poor drainage. Your soil will also have poor aeration because of that compaction. There are no air spaces in between, and it may also have waterlogging. And also, root penetration in that soil will also be hampered. And therefore, you need to do some improvement in that soil. And suppose maybe your soil has maybe around 2.0 gram per cubic centimeter. Then during plowing, you have to do deep plowing. You do deep plowing so that your soil can be loose and your soil can have a lot of depth for easier penetration of the roots. And also, you can be able to apply manure so that they can be, that is organic manure, so that there is a good aeration and also good water retention within your soil. I mentioned about liming, which is done for acidic soil. We are going to look at a few aspects about liming. Lime is usually recommended when the pH value is 5.5, 5.2 or less. It is not for all situations where the pH is less than 5.2 when liming is recommended. Liming will depend on the aluminium saturation in the soil. And also for the aluminium saturation, it also depends on the crop, because you find some crop such as tea and coffee usually requires good levels of aluminium, because aluminium is usually important because of the growth and the processes of tea and coffee production. During the growth stages of this crop, during leaf growth and during flowering, during berry formation, and also during leaf growth, you find that aluminium is important. And therefore, for this kind of plants, at some level of aluminium, you will not need to do liming. But for other crops, lime or aluminium saturation is very detrimental to the growth of this plant, because you're going to find that aeration at some point will be hampered, uptake of nutrient and water will be hampered, and generally the plant will have stunted growth. And therefore, at some saturation level, aluminium you have lime is usually recommended, and this is usually below the pH level value of 5.2. In order to determine the saturation or the level of aluminium saturation in the soil, we usually have laboratory incubation method that is usually done. And once this laboratory incubation method is done, which takes around 6 weeks, after 6 weeks, there will be a result that will be able to determine the level of aluminium saturation in that soil. And by using that result, then the amount of lime to be applied per unit of soil is usually given for the pH. So you're going to find the pH value, including now the saturation of aluminium in that soil, is going to determine the level of lime that's going to be applied in that soil. And this is, of course, done by the experts who are going to do the calculation once we have this saturation level of aluminium, and then a recommendation is given in kg per the unit area of land that is being considered. The next issue we are going to look at is the CEC, or what we call the cation exchange capacity. And we said this is the capacity of the soil to hold nutrients and water, and also uptake of the same. And once this is given as a moderate or as sufficient, then we are going to say that your soil is in good health. And CEC is usually determined by several factors, because if the first factor is the organic matter, if the organic matter content is sufficient in your soil, then it will mean the CEC, the capacity of your soil to hold nutrient, is also good. If your pH is between the range that we say it is moderate, that we say is optimal, from 5.5 to 6.8, then it will mean the CEC of the soil is also good. And if the texture class that is given is loamy for your soil, then it will mean the cation exchange capacity is also good. And therefore, the cation exchange capacity is determined by all those factors that I've mentioned. And once those factors are in sufficient amount or sufficient measurement, then here we are going to say that your soil is healthy. And therefore, in order for you to improve the cation exchange capacity, or the capacity of the soil to absorb the nutrient, to hold the nutrient also and water, and also to be able to uptake this by the plant, or to avail this to the plant, Then improve on the organic matter. You improve on the pH value through, of course, liming and also use of the acidic fertilizers. And also, by improving the textural class, as I have mentioned, by doing soil conditioning. Because if your soil is sandy, then you can be able to apply manure so that you can be able to improve aspects such as aeration, water retention, and even the organic matter and the humus content of the soil.